Welcome back. We are in week 3 of growth groups at Westside this fall, and we're having a blast. I'm here with my friend Nancy Casteel, coach, psychologist, and we're actually in her office space in Portland. And we're going to be talking in this little session about how do we move from intention to action? How do we really take ownership of what God is moving us to do? And so I want to kind of pop in with a thought, and that is back in the days of the apostles. And you see this story happening, and you might look at yourself and go, well, I'm far from an apostle, working on maybe being a follower of Jesus. That's where most of us are working on. But how do you get to the place where you feel like you have a clear and powerful place to go in life? That's something that you think God is asking you to do. And we all learned in our services this last weekend about what's called the Great Commission. Jesus says, go make disciples, teach people what I've taught you. And it's this big thing. He says, go do this. And it's called the Great Commission because it becomes our mission. If you're a follower of Jesus, there is a universal thing that God wants all of us to do. And it involves knowing Jesus, sharing Jesus with other people, being a person that now is in God's family. And then he's got some instructions for us that are universal for all people to learn to become like him in character, essentially is what that is. But there's also a unique calling and mission that we all have. And we find a little bit of information about that in Acts chapter 13 in the New Testament. This is after the church has started to really expand rapidly. And you have these apostles who are leading it. And we pick it up in Acts chapter 13. I want to read a little section of Acts 13 where it says, among the prophets and teachers of the church at Antioch were Barnabas and Saul. And it mentions Saul, whose name was Saul before it was Paul. So Paul the apostle, Barnabas and Paul. If you're a person who maybe has read the New Testament, you might recognize those two names, particularly Paul the apostle, Saint Paul. These guys were in a church. They were asking questions about what was next for them. And all of a sudden, they got it. It was this moment of clarity. And boom, it's like God made it clear what their mission was. And so it says, set apart, appoint Barnabas and Saul for the special work to which I've called them. And that resonates with people at different stages and in different ways. But the idea would be, what if God has a special work for you? And maybe you sort of have an idea of what it is. Maybe you don't. I mean, there's a universal mission that we're all on, but there's also a unique mission that God has for every single person. This is different for each person. And part of our journey in life is to discover that. In this Change Your World series, we're really hoping that God would move all of us into a place where we're super clear on what our unique mission is in this season of our life. And, you might pause and go, well, I see people like that who they seem like they're just on it. They seem like they know what they're supposed to be doing. They're making a difference. They're plugged into whatever that is, that big, purpose that they're supposed to have. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how I get from where I am to where they are. I don't know how to become that way. And so we're going to unpack that a little bit in this session. And that's why I invited Nancy in, is to help us how do we get from intention, we all want that, mm-hmm. to actually living that way.
Well, and first of all, Gabe, I was thinking, what kind of things get in our way mm-hmm. before we're ready, kind of like Paul and Barnabas, because I think in Acts, it talks about Paul or Saul and Barnabas came to it after prayer and contemplation. I can't remember the wording exactly. And so...
Yeah, they were praying and fasting.
Praying and fasting,
with a group, right?
And so, so before we go to that quiet contemplation, I wanted to ask everybody, when you're thinking about what your mission is, when you're thinking, am I living the life I want to lead, the life I should lead, whatever that would be, am I where I want to be? I'd say I want first to ask you, who are you listening to? Consider who's speaking into your life right now. And in a way, I want to go, hey, get rid of the garbage. Whether that's historic garbage. I mean, I certainly know for myself that I had a dad that nothing was ever good enough. So I had some of those voices, his voice, still in my head as a young adult and not so young adult and all of that. So who are you listening to? And also in your life right now, who are you listening to? And what I'd say is pay attention to the people's lives when they share their opinions. Are they living a life that you admire? Are they, if they're not, then don't listen to them. Get your advice from people who are clearly showing you that they're implementing what they're professing to you. And that they have a life or pieces of the life that you would like to have. We talk about like modeling, or when we model our behavior after somebody or something like that. Imitation is not stealing stuff from somebody. We can see things that other people have, and we see how they went about that and getting them, and we can mimic that.
Yeah, shoot, even the Apostle Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ.
Exactly.
Imitate me as I imitate Christ.
Exactly. So that's the first part. So my second point would be, are you stuck in a woulda, coulda, shoulda kind of frame of mind? Are you spending time dwelling in that rearview mirror that, if you've heard any of our Midweek Motivation podcasts that we've done together, I've talked about the rearview mirror, which is you're looking back at history. You're looking back at what happened in the past. Nothing you can change, nothing you can make different, instead of going forward. Are you spending time thinking, why me? Why can't I? I wish I could have. If I'd only been able to go to school, if I was only a better student, if I had a better childhood, then I would have been able to. And I'd say to that, stop that, because nothing is stopping you from shifting that. We're not victims in our own life. Okay. So know that you don't have to stay in one place. Sometimes our pride gets in the way, and sometimes we are like, well, I can't shift because, I make too much money, or if I shift, it'll look like I'm a failure, or, all of those kind of things. So just know, we only have so much time and energy every day, and those are limited resources. So how are you spending your time and energy? Are you doing something that is of the value that makes you content? The value that is bringing purpose to your life, that is helping others, that's a positive influence in the world, and that brings you the stuff that gives you meaning, gives your life meaning. We're continuously evolving. So just keep that in mind. One thing I was going to say, my example was, I've been so impressed by it. Some of you in the church will know Nick Tiffany. I am so impressed by him because he's not very old, but at his age, which is not the young spring chicken of 20 or something like that, 25, he's going back to school right now. And he's changing his career, and he's developing into this new profession, which I just think that's amazing. That's so awesome. So use that as an example. He's one who's walking the walk right now. He's walking his talk. And those are the kinds of things to think about. So if you think like, purpose would really be doing something that I have to go back to school for. There's nothing that says that how you did in school in the past means it's the only way that it's going to ever be. So, but that moves me into the intention, how you move from intention into action.
Yeah.
I think in that quiet contemplation, try to get clear on who you are, what you're good at, what brings you joy, what are you passionate about. If money didn't matter, what would you do? What would you be doing right now?
Oh man, that's a question that we could all spend a little time on, isn't it? If money didn't matter. Yeah.
Well, because some of us are going to find that our purpose is going to be connected to how we earn an income.
Yeah.
Because we live in a capitalistic society, so we're going to have to earn money to live. But others may find that their passion or their purpose is going to be in a different place. Maybe it's going to be in working with people in a church. Maybe it's going to be in the Boys and Girls Club, so, or something like that, where they find that it's not something that's going to earn enough money to pay rent.
Yeah.
But I can have this job over here, but I know that my purpose is really developing in what I'm doing outside of those hours that I'm earning income.
And I think a good example would be the Apostle Paul. He was an apostle, a church planter, a teacher, but he did all that for free. He actually made tents. He was a tent maker.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how he paid his bills.
Clearly, I probably should have known that.
Hey, that's all right. We learn every day.
We do. So ask yourself, when you come up with those questions and you start brainstorming, how can you expand those things that bring you joy, that you're passionate about? How can you expand those into the rest of your life? So the other piece is, and it's something which I've been learning a lot more about lately, that's very important in kind of where Westside comes at all of this, and that is connecting to Christ, connecting to community, connecting to your calling, with those being kind of successive.
Yeah.
And I think, where are you at any given moment on that continuum? It's going to shift. It's not like it's always going to be one direction, but I mean, clearly living more Christ-like, those values, those attributes, those are going to lead to, having commitment in whatever you're doing in life, creating a purpose-filled life. And then that's going to lead to you finding out what your calling is. So
yeah, and maybe that word calling deserves us to unpack it a little bit, because there could be some mystery around that, right?
Sure.
We've even talked and joked a little bit about that before. Like, I've actually God's never actually called my phone. You know what I mean? And or we say, did you hear God's voice?
Dial.
Oh, nice. Wow. Jealous. But, we might ask a question like, have you heard God's voice? And I mean, it's not like we're not being literal about, at least I've never heard God's voice.
Right.
But,
But I mean, I definitely have thought, am I doing this right? Like, when do I know that God is actually speaking to me? And knowing that in that quiet contemplation, your answers to those questions, who you are, what you're good at, what brings you joy, that can be God speaking into you.
Yeah, I like to think of it as nudges. Like, God nudges us. And a lot of times, if you want to hear God's voice, he's going to do it a lot of times. It's going to be reinforced. It's going to be in concert with his word. So it's going to be aligned with what he already showed us. The universal is going to be in place before the unique comes into place. But those nudges.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think that the universal piece of our lives will be in place in terms of going, I've decided I'm going to follow Jesus, and I want to grow in character like him. And so my unique calling is not going to come outside of that and be like, oh, but you don't have to be like Jesus, so you can go over and do that. That's God's calling for you. It's not. It's always going to be underneath,
Perfect.
What is God calling every follower of Jesus to do and be?
Right.
Inside of that, there's going to be a lot of unique things that he can nudge us toward, right?
Well, and I think that actually also spurs me on to say, I think that God actually calls us to say you're an accountant and you go, well, I really love numbers and I really love doing this job or bookkeeper or something like that. And you think, but that's really not a calling. But why not? Because
absolutely.
I think, again, be the best at whatever your chosen work is right now, and do it where it impacts people, because even if you're working with numbers, you're working with people's numbers, and I think, I mentioned this in a previous podcast, that again, just you could go about that work and say, and I'm going to help demystify money. I'm going to help to, have people, fear it less, or, anything like that. And it could be even, I work at a grocery store. I'm going to help to have access to food and a decent environment to bring your kids into, so that you can get what you need, because we're humans and we have to eat, anything like that. So one thing in all of this is to really think about, how do I add value to my world? And your world can be your home. It could be your mental life. It could be your church. It could be your group of friends. It could be the world. I mean, it's on all sorts of levels. And understand your natural strengths. All of those questions up here are going to help you to identify what your natural strengths are, or your gifts. And if you haven't done, and this is not a shameless plug, but if you haven't done the spiritual gifting workshop, my husband Matt and I, we did that. And I found it to be really interesting because it is almost like an exercise in doing what I'm asking you to do right now. Because it's not an exercise of what are your spiritual gifts in order to figure out how you can fit into what the church needs at all. It's more about how can the church help you to find your purpose, your passion, your gifts that you can provide in whatever fashion it makes sense within the community.
Well said.
So,
so sign up and go.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're unsure what your strengths are, I mean, so oftentimes we are so quick to know what our weaknesses are, but we really struggle to be knowledgeable on our strengths and be proud of them, because it seems like you're being boastful or you're not being humble. But I think it's really imperative to know what are your natural strengths and how can I put those to work? So,
well, and let me just say this. Jesus says, go make disciples. And then he goes, Barnabas and Paul, I'm sending you to the unique work I've called you to. It's not like we're not going to be accountable for that, So he's expecting us to do that. And you have to acknowledge your gifts in order to get that done.
Absolutely.
So it's like, it's essential for us to get real clear on what we're really good at and to be very aware of it.
And then how can you use those strengths? Spending more time dwelling on those strengths than trying to hide your self-perceived weaknesses. We do a lot of that in this life. So how can you make a positive difference in the lives of others? What is your purposeful action every day towards those steps? Sometimes it can be really hard to think of, okay, so I've always thought I wanted to do this. I want to work with kids. I don't know. I'm just pulling something up. And what would need to happen if you don't know how to come up with some small sequential steps towards that? Then talk to somebody. Read a book. I put up a bunch of books here. Read something that actually is really good at saying, in this time of your life, because actually there's some books here that actually are for different parts of your life, different stages in your life. Because I'm looking at my third chapter in life, and what am I going to do with that? And it's going to still have helping people, but it might have a little bit different twist to it. So be open to thinking that through.
I love that advice about looking ahead and seeing small sequential steps. That's so good because that's actually how we kind of move out of where we've been into where we want to go.
Absolutely.
You look at somebody else and they're plugged into their purpose and mission and all, and it seems impossible to get there, but they got there one little baby step at a time.
Absolutely. They did. 100%. That's why I say, yes, listen to the people whose lives are lives you wish you had, but understand that they don't have something you didn't have or you don't have. They just have taken those steps already. And if you're not looking at somebody who's like on a YouTube video that you have no idea who they actually are, but you're looking at somebody in your own life, ask them, what did you do to get there?
That's great.
That's the way we change our world, by one step at a time.
Yeah.
And I would leave you with a quote by, I love this, a quote by Carlos Wallace. I don't know who Carlos Wallace is, but I wanted to give him a little bit of kudos there. And that is, occupy your thoughts with purpose, and you'll be so busy pursuing a meaningful future that there will be no time for doubt, chaos, and disappointment.
That's great. That's great. Wow. I hope that has meant as much to you as it has to me just sitting here having this conversation. And what we're going to ask you to do now is to go to conversation with your group. There's some things we can work out, and we're doing this in community on purpose because that's how we get sharpened. And we're just so grateful to be on this journey with you. Hope you have a great time in your group.